but we are going to be starting off for you today with the latest on the UAW strike, which is not only putting the squeeze on companies and workers as well who are out on the picket lines, but also the automotive suppliers across the state. We do have some news for you, though, that Stellantis has announced that more layoffs are coming to the Toledo machining plant in Perrysburg, Ohio, a transmission plant and casting plant in Kokomo, Indiana. A total of 350 workers could be laid off there. Shawn Fain also announced late yesterday, if there's not serious progress by Friday at noon, that he is going to be making an announcement on where the next walkouts will be in this process. And just to give you an idea of what the automakers' response to that is, Stellantis says they hope to have some kind of common ground by Friday. GM said they're continuing to bargain in good faith to reach an agreement as quickly as possible. Ford has just said negotiations are continuing. And as we watch this and the continued ripple effect, auto suppliers are starting to take a hit from the UAW strike. And I wanted to bring in with me now Glenn Stevens. He's the executive director of Mich Auto and the vice president of automotive and mobility initiatives at the Detroit Regional Chamber. Glenn, it's really good to see you. Thanks for joining me on this one. I wanted just to start off, if you could give us a sense of how suppliers are starting to be impacted by the strike here in day 6 and what you're hearing.
Sure, Christy, it's good to be with you. So we've been talking to suppliers about this for quite some time, and as you know, it's an extremely complex industry. They are coming off of the pandemic, the chip shortage, rising material costs, labor shortages, and everything has started to stabilize. So something like this really upsets a very complex system, and they're fragile. Financially, they're fragile, particularly when you get into the lower tiers. So we're really concerned, and we're seeing it spread a little bit, as you just mentioned. And if it goes further, we're really concerned about the economy here in Michigan and across those communities where suppliers are.
Give us a sense, Glenn, of the numbers of the economic impact when we're dealing in the millions of dollars here in Michigan.
Right. So the industry as a whole is a $300 billion economic impact to the state on a consistent basis. I mean, that's massive. That's our largest industry. And to put it in context, in 2019, the General Motors strike, one company for a short period of time, not a real short period of time, but also not a long time, had a 1/4 equivalency recession in Michigan. So we really can feel it quick. And one auto job has a multiplier of between 6 to 8 different indirect jobs. So it really gets cascading through the communities quickly.
When we talk about, and you said that suppliers, of course, and everyone across the industry has been watching and waiting for this to happen, there's a lot that has to be put in place with even tier 2 and tier 3 suppliers in terms of, okay, do we ramp down production? Do we pay our employees maybe just 75% to sit out for a while? There's a lot of different scenarios that each one of these companies are trying to do to try to accommodate and see how far this is going to go.
Right, and it doesn't just impact the hourly and the plant workers. There already are companies that are laying off salaried employees at their headquarters, their R&D, their technical centers. They have to, because it's a very, very capitally intensive, cash intensive basis, and they have to conserve it. Like I said, the supply chain is very fragile. So we're seeing that already. We're going to see more of that. And the other concern is it takes a lot to hang on to labor in a tight labor market. If you are going to let people go or lay people off, there's a really big concern about getting them back and having that workforce stable again in your operations.
Yeah, what are suppliers telling you in terms of trying to hang on to the talent that they've already acquired?
Well, they've done everything that they can, and I really think, and I commend the suppliers across Michigan and across the industry, they've done a lot of progressive things. I mean, there are companies that are even putting daycare systems in centers into their plants and their facilities now. I mean, Gentex over on the west side has got a really good project that they're doing with that. So they're doing everything to make the employee experience as best they can. But there's a fear that if there's a shutdown or they have to shut down and they have to lay people off, they will find other employment. And there are other jobs available in the market right now with labor being tight.
Hey, Glenn, is there something that you're looking with the work that you're doing in terms of projections? Like if this strike goes on for 6 weeks, if this strike goes on for 6 months, what are you watching now in terms of timeline that we start to get into some very, I guess, serious places?
Yeah, we really don't know, Christy. I mean, there's really no. I mean, one of the encouraging things that developed last night or yesterday was that there's a tentative settlement with Unifor and Ford in Canada. That's encouraging, but we really don't know where they're at right now. We do know that 6 weeks is not something we want to talk about, and 6 months is not even something we want to consider. The ramifications to the supply base, to the economy, would absolutely be disastrous if anything like that transpired.
And when we talk about Michigan and how much that we have invested in automotive, as we know, since since the beginning of the automobile, and then looking at expanding with battery plants and looking at expanding with different kinds of suppliers and bringing businesses here to Michigan, it is that stability of, gosh, when something like this, when a strike does happen, that we do have that large investment here in Michigan.
We do. There's nothing like it in the world. You have 26 different OEMs, including the startup OEMs operating here. You have 96 of the top 100 suppliers. You have thousands of facilities across Michigan, and thousands is an accurate number. So 120 years this industry has evolved, and this industry is transitioning. So we need to make sure that the OEMs and labor forge an agreement that they remain competitive, because they have to compete with Toyota and Honda and Mercedes and Volkswagen and Hyundai, but they're also going to have to compete with Tesla more and more. And also the Chinese OEMs are really flooding the world with cheap, high-tech EVs. So what's at stake here for Michigan is immediate, but on a long-term basis, we have to compete with the world.
Absolutely, and you do make a good point about talking about some of those other manufacturers that do not have UAW represented labor, and that is a different cost on the bottom line in trying to make Stellantis and GM and Ford competitive, and really companies that are going to be successful into the future when they do carry some kind of different cost.
They do. There's a differential right now. Different numbers are bantered around, but there's a differential right now. If that gap widens, they can't compete with them. So we're really concerned about that. Does everyone feel, including the OEMs, because the OEMs have put very generous offers on the table, does everyone feel that the UAW and labor should be making more and should be able to raise that standard? No question about that. But we have to be able to compete nationally and internationally. And if that gap widens, they can't do that. And that is a threat to Michigan's industry, let alone these companies' ability to compete and to invest into the future.
All right, Glenn Stevens, the director of Mich Auto. It's so good to see you. Thanks for the perspective.
Thanks, Christy. Good to see you too.